So at this time, I have the great pleasure to introduce our last speaker, Lieutenant General John F. Sattler. He graduated from the U.S. Naval Academy in 1971 and was commissioned a second lieutenant in the U.S. Marine Corps. He served as a Marine officer for 37 years, retiring in 2008 from his last position as the Director for Strategic Plans and Policy for the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. During his 37 career, he served in numerous command and staff positions in the Marine Corps and with joint commands. His assignments as a general officer included Assistant Division Commander, 2nd Marine Division, Director for Combating Terrorism on the Joint Staff, Director of Marine Corps Public Affairs, Commanding General of the 2nd Marine Division, Commander Combined Joint Task Force, Horn of Africa, Director of Operations, Central Command, and Commanding General of the 5,000 Marine and Sailor 1st Marine Expeditionary Force in Iraq, 2004 to 2005. He recently retired from the leadership chair in the Vice Admiral's James Stockdale Ethical Leadership Center at the U.S. Naval Academy after 7 years, and is on the board of directors for the world-class Semper Fi Fund Veterans Charity. And at this time, Jamie, do you have something else you'd like to say?
Go Navy, beat Army.
Thanks, Susan, appreciate it. Okay, I'm gonna try to come off up here because I got up this morning at 4:30 because I was worried about the weather, and I drank 14 cups of coffee, literally. And then on the way here, I had a Hershey's with almond bar. So, Bonnie, I'm like a kindergarten student right now, and if I try to stand up there behind the podium, it just won't work. So I'm sure you're asking yourself right now, what is the United States Marine doing here talking to us at a very, very technical, highly professional conference, which is what this is. When I was asked to come by Jamie, I said, well, I'm not going to try to talk the science piece because anybody can pull up my college grade transcripts and you can see that I am not qualified to talk in that arena at all. But what I thought I would do is talk a little bit about what could we take from, I'll say, the battlefield, the military services, as far as ethical decision-making, leadership goes, and we could apply that to each individual here within the room or to the organizations you represent. So I went ahead and pulled some slides together, a couple stories. And what I'd like to do, my goal would be, at the end of this presentation, if you've learned nothing new, but you saw what's up there and you checked them off your list, what's in your wheelhouse of character, and you go away saying, hey, I learned nothing new, I'm already doing all that, then I'd be a very happy person as I tried to get my way back to my car down by Camden Yards. This is not a very parking-friendly event here, by the way. Or if you said, hey, there's one thing I need to work on, or there's one thing I think he's crazy on, does not apply to me, then I would be happy again because you're going to take one thing away from this next 40-minute session here. So if you'll permit me, utilizing, in this case, the United States Marines, because that's my 37 years where I had the opportunity, and it was an opportunity to serve, and then the last 7 years, working at the United States Naval Academy in the Ethical Leadership Department, teaching ethical leadership to 18 to 22-year-olds who are about to not graduate, meaning the ending, but commence, the beginning, commence the rest of their lives as leaders. Leaders in the military, leaders in government, leaders in business after they've served in the United States Navy or the United States Marine Corps. So the first slide up there, well, you know, we've already talked about diligence, dedication, and devotion. I mean, diligence means passing the legal standard, done in a very thorough and a very careful way. And we do due diligence in the United States military just constantly. We train those young men and women who come out of high schools and colleges to be prepared to go forward and do great things for the nation and do things that the nation would be proud of. And the dedication piece just means you're committed to a task, a tenacity, a doggedness to get the right answer, to get things done appropriately. And then devotion kind of takes dedication to the next level. It talks about things like love and passion. Love and passion for what you do. That's beyond dedication. That kind of raises the bar even a little bit higher. But those 3 Ds, if you took those 3 Ds and you looked at them every morning and you conducted your daily activities with those as your standard, I don't think you could do wrong. And then at the bottom of that slide it says, why does ethics really matter? And ethics is nothing more than the moral principles that govern an individual's actions, what an individual does. What is your ethical code? What is your moral code? Does your compass constantly point north, or do you let situations or people or time or something else deviate that compass? And those young faces you see up there, this is 2004, and for some of you might remember there was a big battle fought in Iraq called the Battle of Fallujah. And Fallujah, we kicked off in November of 2004, took 10,000 warriors, soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines from the northern side into that town to drain the swamp and get rid of the terrorists. They weren't called ISIS at the time, but the conscienceless, irreconcilable thugs who had taken that town over, who were exporting their terrorism around the country. This is on the eve of that, and if you look at the faces there, less than a year ago, those young men, and there could have been young men and young women, it just happened to be this slide only has men in it, who were attending a high school somewhere in your neighborhood, who maybe delivered your paper and never hit your driveway once in 2 years, constantly up in the gutter in the bushes, played on your high school football teams, lacrosse, whatever the sport may have been. And here they are now being given a moral order to risk their lives the next day, to move forward from the safest place they're going to be in to conduct this operation. And one more thing they're given the moral authority to do, which in most cases they've never had before in their lives. That's the moral authority to take a life, to take an enemy life in combat because it's part of the mission. It's part of what your United States military does not want to do, but is prepared to do and can do when ordered to. So the moral, the ethical, all comes into play. Now, once this huddle breaks up, they'll break into 4 individual, 4-man fire teams. So you'll have a 19 or a 20-year-old in charge of 3 other Marines clearing a building, moving through a room. And they have to make an ethical and moral decision, do basically the forensics. Is that a friend or foe when the closet door opens and somebody jumps out in the middle of the battle? Shoot, not shoot. So a lot of the things that they have to do are drilled into them constantly to get that ethics, those moral principles that will guide that decision making. In your profession, you live and die reputation-wise at a minimum by getting it right. Truth matters. And your trust factor, next slide please. The uncompromising standard. When you are doing your forensics work, those standards are there for a reason. Sometimes the more senior we become, the more, longevity we have. Gray hair, no hair, it sort of comes along with that. We start to think that we're above the standard. And we may compromise that standard, or we may witness others on our team who want to take a shortcut and compromise. And if you read Gandhi's quote up there, to know what's right and not to do it is the worst of cowardice. It's moral malfeasance. It's cowardice. And anybody can stand up and say that's not right, and it seems like an easy thing to do. But we've all been there sometime in our lives. You can't find your voice, your knees are shaking, you know what's about to go down is not right, but you just can't seem to interject yourself. And if by staying down and saying nothing, you can let that pass on by, and it's hard to hold somebody accountable for an inaction. So you can get away with it. We probably have all seen it, and we probably, myself included, have done it, and have never been proud of it. We give all kinds of awards in the military for physical courage, for conspicuous gallantry above and beyond the call of duty. Well, faced with withering enemy fire, move from a safe position forward to rescue a downed fellow warrior, in our case, Marine, drag him back to safety. We do a citation, Bronze Star, Silver Star, whatever valor level it comes out to. But nowhere do you find when for conspicuous gallantry above and beyond the call of duty, when faced with a moral issue, and feeling the pressure from seniors, peers, and subordinates alike, stood tall and did the right thing. And I tell you right now that sometimes moral courage is harder than physical courage. Physical courage, you get the adrenaline rush, you got to go, you got to move, you got to get it done. And sometimes it just kicks in, your training takes over. Moral courage is a little bit more of tapping the hands, wringing the hands, thinking a little bit, hyperventilating, the burn in your stomach, and the opportunities pass by. So in your profession, you live and die by that trust factor and getting it right. And who is the gatekeeper of your profession? You are. Just like we are as United States Marines. We self-correct because the institution and the principles we stand for are more important than any individual's feelings. And sometimes calling someone out and challenging them, not screaming or yelling, not humiliating or dehumanizing, but just challenging what is about to be done is hard to do. And just that quote from Gandhi, you know, the worst of cowardice is when you don't display that moral courage. Next slide. And there's a classic case right there. You know, this is a great quote from Gandhi. You know, the moment that your motives become suspect, everything you do becomes tainted. And you can't back out of that. You are spray painted with that for the rest of your career. You will always be looked at and thought about for that incident where you compromised. In this particular case, Lance Armstrong, you know, top of the world, greatest athlete, I mean, fill in the blanks. And then when it found out what he had done to get to that position, and then what he had done to cover up what he had done, and the intimidation factor that he put on other people who kept their mouths shut till they finally couldn't take it anymore. Go back to the previous quote, to know what's right, not to do it, is the height of cowardice, moral cowardice. In this particular case, when it all came out, it came tumbling down. The trust factor went to zero. And if you take a look at the top of this, trust, this is a semi-quote out of Stephen Covey's book, Speed of Trust. Speed of trust makes an organization go. If I tell you to do something and I'm your boss, and you go, can I have that in writing? Could you give me that in writing? Because I don't think that the spoken word will be there if this goes south. If you're in an organization like that, you do not have the speed of trust. In the United States military, when you're told to go, if you don't have the trust in your seniors and your peers to rock on the order, we're going to lose lives. We are going to lose lives because he who hesitates is lost. So a speed of trust doesn't mean that you're rapidly going through the process and the procedures to get to the right answer. It just means when you're told to do something, or you're told to investigate something, or to take something back and relook at it, that you don't doubt the individual who just told you to do that. All right, so if I was to tell you that your trust factor, when I see a man or woman in the military coming towards me, I don't see gender, I don't see uniform of Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps. I'm looking at their trust factor. You know, it's if you think of Hester Prynne, remember the Scarlet Letter? Everybody knew what the A was for. All right, for the trust factor, it comes in different sizes. Some are so small you can't see them. Let's say if you're wearing a leather sweater with your T factor on it. If you're not trusted, you got a little wee T, people aren't going to move. They're not going to move when you tell them to rock, you tell them to move. They're going to freeze up, they're going to hesitate, and they're going to constantly question what you're asking them to do. All right? Now, questioning, you know, there are lots of times you should question, but there are times when you shouldn't if that trust factor exists. So your competency, you all live and die by your competency. How good are you at what you do? How do you constantly stay up with the latest technology, the latest techniques, the latest practices, reading your professional journals, coming to conferences like this? You're always working on your competency. You can never become complacent. I have arrived means you're starting to die. Your competency, there's no such thing as maintaining the status quo. And inside of Iraq, every base you left, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, when you drove out the gate, there was one giant sign above the gate as you went out into enemy territory. And it said, "Complacency kills." Complacency kills. It not only does it on the battlefield, it does it in any profession. If you start to become so arrogant, you think you have arrived, you don't have to study your profession anymore, you don't have to talk to your colleagues and collaborate, then you're on the slippery slope. You're dying. You are dying as a professional. And the other part of it is your character. If you are unbelievably competent, but you are not a man or woman of character, you're going to get a very low character factor. And if one's a 10, if you did 10 and 10, perfect score is 100. If you have a 10 in competency and you have a 0.5 in character, anytime you multiply something by a fraction, it gets smaller. So you're only going to be a 5 overall. And if you have a 0 in either category, you're zeroed out. And you're looking for balance in your life. The beauty of it is you control your character. What's in your wheelhouse of character, what each and every individual sees when they hear you speak or they see you approaching or they see your name on something that comes forward. They're looking at that and saying, high trust factor, unbelievable character, woman or man of character, unbelievable competency. And that's what you want. You control that T factor. So I would say if I was, to die, I will, but hopefully not today, in a snowstorm. But if I was to pass on and my gravestone said Sattler, United States Marine, and had a big T on that, I'd be happy. That's all they have to put is that T for trust. I'm not saying I have that or I earned that, but that's always been my goal. That trust factor, character, competency. So when you sign your name or you get up and speak, everybody takes it to the bank, takes it all the way to the nth degree. Next slide. I'm going to probably pick this up a little bit. So with this is sort of a little, we walked through with the midshipmen at the Naval Academy. Keep in mind, they come from all 50 states and a number of foreign countries. They come from all economic groups. They come from all family situations and backgrounds. So we're trying to cross-level that to get them all to understand the ethical standards that we expect and demand out of each and every one of our military men and women. So when we start to think what makes good people, I'd say everybody in this room is a very competent man or woman of high character. Got that? So how do we find people who are way up here all of a sudden fall off the ladder? All of a sudden do something that tarnishes them and shrinks their T factor that they worked their whole life to earn almost down to nothing. So if you take a look at the first one it says unethical command climate. In the military, each organization has a command climate. The individual, the woman or man in charge, sets that climate. Everybody knows what good looks like. What is our ethical code? It may not be called an ethical code, but it's the key points that make that unit, that organization function every day. And the default, if you're alone and you're not sure what to do, you default to that command climate. And you'll find the right decision to move forward. You will make an ethical and a moral decision that is the right decision based on the command climate. So if you have a bad command climate, if you have a bad work environment and the boss is toxic, screaming, yelling, leads through fear and intimidation, then you will have bad decisions made inside that organization. So good men and women who come into that environment, who are subjected to that kind of a climate, will make bad decisions. They will. And sometimes it'll be out of fear, and sometimes it'll be out of I just want to get this over and move on. So if you are in charge, and that means you have one person or more working for you, I ask you to ask yourself, what's the climate you've created? Do the men and women who work for you understand the ethical decision-making process through your lens, and are they prepared to execute it? And do you lead through influence, or do you lead through intimidation and fear? Intimidation and fear are always going to get you a bad result. And in combat, we found that units that look pretty good, that we didn't know, that were motivated through fear, when you move forward against the enemy shooting, and you're screaming and yelling, and if intimidation and fear is going to rule the day, the shooting is going to be more powerful than the screaming and yelling. Versus a unit where the individual leader motivated and inspired the men and women to influence, and that takes a lot of work, takes a lot of time, takes a lot of energy to be that influencer, that when those organizations got into a tough situation, they stood tall and they accomplished the mission. So That's point one. I'm not going to talk that long on each one. End justifies the means. We've all heard that before. If you go in and predetermine whether somebody's guilty or not, this is a scumbag, done this before. You all of a sudden start to blur the evidence that you are being counted on to go through the process and the procedure and let the evidence speak for itself. Not, he's guilty, she's guilty, I'm gonna do a shoddy job here, and I'm just gonna get this over with right now. So does the end justify the means? And the answer is no. No, it does not. And you need to make sure, and you do, because you are the protectors of the integrity of the organization, that you don't take that shortcut and let that happen. Next one is the trivialization. In our case, let's say that there's a young officer talking to his platoon, and he said, none of these enemy are worth one of my Marines' lives. And you hear that being said. That's trivializing the enemy now. They are now almost an inanimate object. And we don't treat the enemy that way. If they're going to surrender, we capture, we take them. If we wound them, we take them in and we put them in our hospitals to be treated. So sometimes a comment by you as the leader will trivialize. Well, this part of the science isn't all that important. Trust me, I've got a lot of experience here. We can skip these steps and go right to here because you're trivializing those steps. You have now just taught individuals below you that that's an acceptable norm because of who you are and the stature that you have. So you have to be very, very careful of that one. One-time exception, I've always done all these processes correctly, but today I'm short on time, and you know what? The last 50 times I've done these four, they've always just not panned out anyway. It's almost worthless steps in the process and the procedure. And when you do that, then you start taking those shortcuts. I'm just going to do it this one time. In our business, if you're doing a flight check on a helicopter and the pilots come out and you're the maintenance crew, and you go up to the pilot and say, everything's done, all the checklist has been accomplished, but you were short on time, so you skip one's bad enough, 2, 3, 4, 5 steps. And off goes the helicopter, and all of a sudden, the 3 or 4 steps that you skip go south. And now the helicopter goes in the water off an amphibious ship, and there's 18 Marines in it, plus a crew, and they all perish. Because that one-time deviation from the standard of the norm was the one-time exception that you and I don't know if when you do that, that is going to be the case, that something's going to go south. Next slide. Groupthink and peer pressure. Everybody's on board, everybody's moving. For some, it's like a lynch mob mentality. Everybody's moving towards they believe is the right answer and the obvious answer, and you're not feeling well. And that's when you start to get a little burn in your stomach. Can't really explain it, but all of a sudden, you go, man, my stomach just doesn't feel good here. But everybody, some very senior with a lot of experience, some junior, young ones that are jumping on board, but you start to realize that this is a lynch mob mentality. We don't have the science, we don't have the process and procedures to back up what we're about to do. It's in those cases that you've got to have a bias for action. And you have to adopt yourself, and if you have people working for you, it's imperative that you establish a climate that disagreement is not disrespect. Disagreement is not disrespect. When disagreement is done tactfully, it's actually part of coming up with the best possible solution. So the first time some junior person raises their hand and challenges you as a leader, and they're cut down, they are humiliated and dehumanized publicly for who do you think you are? What you snot-nosed, fill in the blank. As you start to gush out on them, now you've created an environment of yes men and women. And no organization wants that, because you're here not for your solution or your outcome, you're here for the best solution and the proper outcome. All right, the next one is self-preservation. This goes back to the standing tall again. If your job depends on it and your boss starts to give you an idea or already has the solution asking you to back through, do the research or the chemistry that comes up with this solution I've just given you, that's not right. And self-preservation, your heart's pounding, I need this job, I need a good evaluation, fill in the blanks of what that might be. But in your case, you have got to, just like in the military, if you get an unlawful order, something that doesn't sound right, you have to challenge it and stand up against it. And sometimes the best way to do that is just by asking questions. For example, I never had this happen, but if I had a boss who told me something that looked like it was a violation of the law of armed conflict, we were being asked to do something or told to do something that wasn't moral and ethically correct. It wasn't legal. I would just simply, what I would do and what I teach the young officers to do is ask the question, excuse me, ma'am, excuse me, sir, are you actually asking us or me to do the following? And when you spell it back out to them and they start to realize it's undefendable, maybe in the emotion they said what they didn't really want to say. You give them the opportunity to back that off and go, no, that's not what I said. If that's what you heard, that's not what I meant. And then you make them re-articulate it to you to make sure that, okay, my moral compass stays north. I can abide by that guidance from you. And boy, am I glad I asked the question because I misunderstood. And move on from there. Misplaced loyalty. This is the hardest one. At the Naval Academy, loyalty to your peers sometimes trumps loyalty to the institution, and in our case, the Constitution. Because all the military, they take an oath of office to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. So the constitutional paradigm is pretty easy to track. But if one of your peers is doing something that's not quite right, my loyalty, no Marine ever leaves another Marine on the battlefield. Loyalty to your battle buddy. That's a great loyalty. We need that. But when loyalty is being challenged because your peer is not being loyal to the uncompromising standard of the institution or the organization, that's one you have to stand up for. Two kinds of loyalty, vertical and horizontal. And it's important in any organization to make sure that that is absolutely understood. And the last one there is lack of moral courage, and we've already pounded that one hard enough. Next slide. All right, so how do you create this kind of ethical climate? And not going to spend too much time on this. There's two categories. The deterrence category is by virtue of there's laws in place, there's regulations in place, there's rules or policies in place within the organization. And by holding those up and having harsh punishment affiliated with them, if you do any of these, there will be consequences. And then, once somebody, hopefully never, but if somebody does violate those principles, that you take appropriate action. That's kind of a deterrence piece that out of fear, because the punishment's so severe, I am not going to do this. You would hope that everyone in the organization took the other side, the moral, ethical side of this just isn't right. I'm not going to do it because it's not the right thing to do. It's not who we are or what we stand for. And I'll give you an example in the military. We do urinalysis constantly. I would like to stand here before you and tell you no Marine, United States Marine ever in my command did drugs because they knew it was the wrong thing to do. But to reinforce that policy, we have random urinalysis that include the commanding general. Include whoever you are. When your number pops up, you go in. It is not just for any portion of the command. It's anonymous. I mean, not anonymous. It is ubiquitous across the entire command when we do those. So if you go home on a weekend, everybody knows, come back Monday, there's going to be urinalysis. And it's a deterrence. On the other side, there are a whole lot of those Marines, soldier, sailor, airmen, and others who take urinalysis, who do it because they understand that it is something that has to be done on the deterrence side, but they don't do drugs because morally and ethically they know their job and what they're responsible to do will be negatively impacted potentially if they did it. So that's kind of an example of the two. So when you do have your deterrence policies, inside the forensic world, you also need to say, okay, how do I get the individuals on my team to buy into the moral obligation, to the aspect of truthfulness, to getting to the absolute best scientific answer we can have as we move forward. A lot of objectivity. There will always be some subjectivity, I got that, but mainly objectivity, so that the results pass the test of time. And going back to the trust factor, all it takes is one individual in the organization to taint everyone. If there was a case where the evidence was tampered with, the forensics weren't done properly, shortcuts were taken, people didn't speak up, and the conclusion comes out, and either the individual is found guilty or innocent based on the shoddy performance, And that comes to light next time we go to court, and then the speed of trust on the forensic evidence goes way down. Wait a minute, everyone's going to remember that case where a small number, an infinitely small number of individuals didn't stand up for the moral and ethical beliefs of the entire organization. And you are going to have the opportunity to drive that moral and ethical piece forward by your own positive actions. But I will also say you have the obligation, when you see it not going well, to find that moral courage to stand tall and have a bias for action to talk to the individual or individuals, or to ensure that that doesn't go forward. Because there is no fine paintbrush in any organization. If a Marine does something wrong, they spray paint the United States Marine Corps. Every Marine suffers. And it's sort of like the aircraft accident. The aircraft, the negatives, when we have an accident, it's out there and everybody watches it multiple times. But you don't watch the multiple good things. They're kind of put off in the background. Same thing goes when you get into this moral and ethical dilemma on results. All right, next slide. So here's just, I always throw this one up to ask each individual, not to a show of hands or anything, but if you look down through this list, General Mattis, later Secretary of Defense Mattis, when he was a division commander in Iraq, he had one great saying: I want to surround myself with men and women who have a bias for action. A bias for action. Not somebody who sits down and goes, boy, I hope somebody comes by and tells me what they want me to do. No, he wants individuals who know their trade, know their profession, see an opportunity and move. Go for the opportunity. See something bad about to happen and move. Move to blunt that, to stop it immediately before it becomes catastrophic. And you can't be everywhere all the time within your organization. But if you created a climate, whoa, make it worse, I'm blind in my left eye, so I wouldn't have seen it if I turned around anyway. But to create that climate where individuals know that inaction is a much greater sin than action that might not come out perfectly right in the end. You don't want your team sitting on their hands waiting to be told because of fear. If I do it on my own, if I show initiative, I might get it wrong. If I get it wrong, I might get chewed out. Those are life learning lessons. Sitting on your butt and staying below the radar screen so you never have the opportunity to A, get it right, or B, get it wrong. You kind of live in that world down here. That's a sad world. It's a sad world, and we would like to invigorate, energize those men and women there to get above that curve. So if you ask these questions here, you always get this with the midshipman. Hey, somebody ought to stop that. I can't believe he's getting away with that. Boy, if she does that, this could embarrass the entire organization. Our credibility is gone if she goes through with this, or what he just did. If they find out about it, our entire organization is going to get a black eye. And those are the kind of questions that, when you point that finger out there, next slide please, last slide, ask yourself this question. Somebody, somebody, somebody. Everybody in this room is somebody. And if you ask yourself the question, if not me, then who? If I am not going to be that somebody to stand up, to go talk to someone about something they're about to do isn't right, or if I'm not about to confront something that is absolutely wrong, I expect someone else to carry that heavy moral burden or that bias for action, then the organization is going to crumble around you. This is a young man named Travis Manion, graduated from the Naval Academy in 2004. There's a foundation called the Travis Manion Foundation. His motto in life, high school all the way through his 4 years at the academy and into the Marine Corps, was if not me, then who? If somebody said, we need somebody too, Travis Manion was already moving forward. He had a bias for action, and it was contagious. Inside any organization he was in, everybody in there started to develop or refine that bias for action. Where when you needed a volunteer, everybody was walking forward before they even knew what needed to be done. So if you have that bias for action, and I was talking at the Naval Academy like 7 years ago, and I told everybody in the room, this is a bad line, I expunged it from my vocabulary, but I said, I love that. If not me, then who? I said, as a matter of fact, I don't have any ink, But if I was to have a tattoo, even though I don't know where I could put it to get all that on it, I'm too small anymore, but it would be, if not me, then who? I looked out at the midshipman. This is where I went afoul. I said, if anybody in this room would like that tattoo, get in touch with me. I'll pay for it. So that weekend, 2 midshipmen are in Georgetown or somewhere, and I get this email. I hear my email, it's about 10:30 at night. I open it up, and it said, hey, General Sattler, it's Midshipman X and Midshipman Y. We're in Georgetown, and there's a tattoo parlor right down the street, wherever the hell they were. And they said, did you really mean what you said about paying for that tattoo? And a big question mark. So I immediately go back. I go, well, you know, paying for the tattoo is sort of like a figure of speech. I said, if you get the tattoo, as you get older, it'll just start to sag and no one will even know what it is. What you really need to do is adopt this as your mantra in life. If not me, who? It's your mantra in life. And I thought I was pretty poetic, and I hit send, and I get a note back that said, I guess that means no. That's all they said. I actually saved the email because it was classic. And then I worried about a week whether the admiral was going to fire me for condoning or recommending tattoos. So the bottom line is you are the caretakers of this great organization. If not you, then who? And lastly, if you don't quite feel you have done that up to this point in your life, the next question is, if not now, then when? It's a great Chinese proverb that says, the best time to have planted a fruit tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is today. So think about that. If not me, then who? If not now, then when? And thank you for all you do. We've done a hell of a lot of things on the battlefield where the forensics have come into play within the military to help us find the perpetrators, walk back to the IED makers. Forensics is a way of life for men and women in uniform, and it's an exacting science. And in our case, just like in law enforcement, somebody's life depends on how well you do it and how credible you are. So maintain your trust factor and get out there and get her done. Thank you very much. All right.
Thank you, General. That was impressive, is all I can say.